A school that has dropped Winston Churchill and J.K. Rowling as house names after students said they didn't think they represented them. A letter written by pupils at Seaford Head School in East Sussex said that the wartime Prime Minister Winston Churchill was a figure who promoted racism and inequality, unfairly imprisoning and torturing many people. No mention of saving the world from impending Nazism and a tyrannical regime running these shores. That's apparently just been whitewashed. It also stated that J.K. Rowling was not a suitable representative for the school following her comments on the trans community. Oh, please, Lord, help me. Let's pick through this. Brendan O'Neill is the editor of Spiked Online. And I guess, but you probably have the same sort of sense of fatigue on these things, Brendan. But, you know, in a way, we shouldn't be surprised when these stories come up time and time again. And yet we are. Is it surprise? Is it anger? Is it just disappointment at the rather curious world we found ourselves in?
I think it's fear. For me, it's fear. It's fear about what has happened to the younger generation. I think they've been corrupted by wokeness. They've been corrupted by this kind of insane political correctness, which looks upon everyone who doesn't share our particular views as evil and wrong and, you know, deserving of being scrubbed from public life. And I think that's what's really worrying about this. The fact that you can have young people saying Winston Churchill doesn't represent us, we don't like him, he's not an sufficiently important or admirable figure for us to have on a house name, and J.K. Rowling, an incredibly important literary figure, they're saying the same about her. It shows that those levels of intolerance have reached down into the younger generations, which I think is really worrying.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know where to start. I mean, we can look at Churchill. I alluded to it at the beginning, Brendan. You know, did the teachers or did nobody at any point counter this and explain that, well, actually, there is you could look at Winston Churchill this way, or maybe your reaction is disproportionate, maybe it's misinformed, perhaps it's been exaggerated, but, you know, you are talking about a leader that is mostly globally recognised as being at the forefront of the battle against Hitler and the Third Reich and making the world a far better place than it would have been. How does all of that get wiped away when these discussions happen? What do you think that process is that's taking place in the minds of these people?
That's a really important question, and it does make you wonder what's being taught in schools. I mean, my impression is that young people are getting a lot of their information now from social media, from loudmouth woke campaigners and certain journalists and certain members of the commentariat. I think they're probably getting a lot of information from those kinds of people, and those kind of people are often very unrepresentative. Most normal people in this country take pride in this country. Winston Churchill is widely admired across this country. Of course, he's a historical figure, and all historical figures should be both celebrated and talked about in depth. You know, we can obviously look at his record, look at what he did that was good, look at what he did that was bad. But my concern is that to a lot of these young people, they just have this impression of him as an evil person. And I think the corrective of history teaching is very important here. And the fact that this school has bowed down to these students and said, OK, we will remove Winston Churchill's name. That's the most worrying thing here, because it suggests that sections of the education system are not standing up for British history.
In a way, I was slightly more perturbed by the J.K. Rowling removal in terms of house names, because I just thought to myself, hang on, this is based obviously on her views on trans issues, and anyone that's bothered to read her rather lengthy and very intelligent response, which I know you have, Brendan, and I did, and we discussed it on the show at the time, would never, by any measure, be able to find anything what apparently is called transphobic within what she said, and she brilliantly explained what she felt and her reasonings behind it. And of course, sadly, because of the strange world we live in, that didn't do anything to curtail the onslaught. In fact, these people doubled down and attacked her even more for a very reasoned answer to their concerns. But I mean, this is a woman that's literally changed the face of children's literature in many, many ways, and has got kids reading, has been an incredible positive in terms of everything. You could even argue that the franchises of Harry Potter, the business that's created economically, it's a huge impact. She's a decent sort. She's, got all of these elements about her. And yet, for some reason, because of a very parochial misinformed, misquoted, invented, hyperbolic interpretation of what she apparently thinks, she's person non grata in a school.
Yeah, it's genuinely shocking, and that's the most shocking thing about this story. The fact that the school has given in to the students' demands to remove J.K. Rowling's name is really, really disturbing, because, as you say, she's made a huge contribution to literature in this country. I think she's the best-selling British author of all time. She's incredibly influential. She got children reading in a way that they hadn't been doing for a long time. She's an important person, and more importantly than that, as you say, the things that she has said about the politics of transgenderism have contained no bigotry or prejudice whatsoever. All she has argued is that there is a clash between certain arguments made by the transgender lobby and women's sex-based rights, women's right to have their own space, their own changing rooms, their own domestic violence shelters. She's raised a very practical problem, and for doing that, she is demonized essentially as a thought criminal, a speech criminal, someone who has dared to question one of the orthodoxies of contemporary politics. So she's being unpersoned. And the thing that worries me is if it can be done to someone as important and big and global as J.K. Rowling, it can be done to anyone. And so it really is important that we stand up to this and say no more. People have got to have the freedom to express these perfectly reasonable opinions.
Indeed, Brendan, thank you. Brendan O'Neill, editor of Spiked Online. And it would be fascinating to speak to anybody. You read these stories and you think, well, there could be nobody on the planet with a brain that could read this and think, so this school, they've got their different houses. You know, you have different house at school, don't you? We had Danes, Britons, Normans, Saxons, that kind of thing. And some people, there's usually a theme in some way. So they had different, they've got Nelson Mandela was one they had J.K. Rowling, they had Winston Churchill, and the pupils at this school, I think the ages of 11 to 17, said they didn't any longer want J.K. Rowling because of her views on trans issues, as if that defines J.K. Rowling. I mean, I'm sure if you went into the background of Nelson Mandela, you'd find some things you didn't like about his past. But you would argue, well, actually, I think we could probably give him a break on that, bearing in mind what the bloke then went on to do and spent 26 years in a flipping cell for his troubles, and Lord knows what went on then, and came out and became the president of the place. That probably usurps that. In the same way with Churchill, you said, well, there might have been parts of the era back then. People spoke a different language. Their lexicons were perhaps disagreeable to many in the common age, understandably so. But then things were normal. But putting that aside, he fought the Nazis and orchestrated the response to a potential onslaught from Hitler and the Third Reich. You'd kind of apply that. J.K. Rowling, I mean, come on. Can we please just grow up on this? Why didn't the head of the school, stand up and say, all of the kids that voted for J.K. Rowling not to be essentially not just no platform, but removed from anything connected to the school, you're all expelled, get out. And they wouldn't say that, of course. But that's what this brings you to. What about the parents in this? By what measure, what intellectual measure were these kids deciding that J.K. Rowling was so offensive? We're talking about J.K. Rowling, not Chairman Mao, for goodness sake. If your house was, we're in Mao House, you could understand there's been a bit of disagreement down in the student committee. Why is that? Well, the people in Mussolini House think that the Mao House is a little bit offensive. You could see that argument, right? It's J.K. Rowling, the woman that invented and wrote Harry Potter, for goodness sake, is apparently so disagreeable and so offensive because of her one element of all the things that J.K. Rowling thinks in life. One element that has a crossover into the trans debate is apparently disagreeable. So what? So what if it is? It would be very easy for me to fill a switchboard of people who will say, yeah, you're right, it's absolutely outrageous and blah, blah. We know all of that. And I'd love to speak with you, but I'd more like to speak to somebody who agrees with the kids that decided that J.K. Rowling and Winston Churchill were simply too much to take. Their poor little minds were hyperventilating on a daily basis. The poor bairns couldn't sleep at night, thinking that the evil that is Rowling was the name of the house they were in. Good Lord. How did we get here, for goodness sake? It's times like this I want me nan. Give me a big hug and say, don't worry, love, it'll be all right.